simple walk with my dog turned into a nightmare when 3 men thought I was an easy target. What they didn't know was that my dog, Duke, wasn't just a pet, he was their worst nightmare. They thought they could get away, but the ending of the story taught them a lesson they'd never forget. Let's start from the beginning. My name is Margaret Maggie Lawson. I'm 65 years old and have lived in this small Connecticut neighborhood for decades. It's usually a quiet, safe place tucked away from the hustle of the city. But sometimes, quiet can be deceiving. Every evening around 9:30, I take my dog Duke out for a walk. It's our little ritual. Just me, him, and the crisp night air. Duke isn't just any dog. He's a Belgian Malinois, muscular, intelligent, and trained for situations most dogs wouldn't handle. Before he came to me, he served as a police 9 for 6 years, until an injury retired him. I was lucky to adopt him, and he's been more than a companion. He's my protector. That night felt no different until I turned onto a dimly lit street. 3 men loitered under a flickering streetlight, their shadows stretching across the cracked pavement. Something about their posture, the way they leaned into one another, heads low, made my stomach churn. Duke felt it too, his ears perked, and a low growl rumbled in his throat. One of the men noticed us and smirked, nudging his friend. "Hey, look at this," he called out, his tone dripping with mockery. "Grandma's out for a stroll with her guard dog." The other 2 laughed, their voices cutting through the still night. "Yeah," one added, "maybe she's teaching him to carry her groceries." Duke took a step closer to me, his body tense and ready. His growl grew louder, a warning. The men began walking toward us. My heart raced, but I forced myself to stay calm. Panic wouldn't help, and I'd lived long enough to know that fear only emboldens predators. The tallest of the 3 spread his arms wide in mock innocence. "Relax, lady," he said, his grin spreading. "We're just saying hi. No need for the guard dog act." But I knew better. Duke knew better. His growl deepened, his stance firm, as if daring them to test their luck. I tightened my grip on his leash, my breath steady. The tallest man reached into his pocket, pulling out something metallic that glinted under the weak streetlight. My stomach dropped. It was a knife. "Don't worry, Grandma," he sneered. "This'll be over before you even blink." Duke let out a sharp bark, his powerful voice echoing through the street. The sound startled one of the men, who flinched, but the others stayed put. I could see the intent in their eyes. This wasn't just idle teasing. They meant harm. "Come on," said the shortest of the 3, stepping forward. "Let's just deal with her and move on." Duke moved too, standing fully between me and the men. His growl was so deep now, it felt like it vibrated the air. His fur stood on end, and his teeth flashed in the dim light. The tallest man chuckled, nudging his friend. "What's this mutt going to do? Bark us to death?" As if on cue, Duke lunged forward with a snarl, stopping just short of the man's leg. The move startled them all, sending them stumbling back a step. The tallest one cursed under his breath, his grip on the knife faltering. "Enough of this!" barked one of them, trying to rally the others. But Duke wasn't giving them time to regroup. With another bark and a lunge, he snapped at the air just inches from the knife wielder's arm. His precision was surgical, calculated, a reminder of the training ingrained in him. "You're crazy!" one of them shouted, backing away. "The dog's nuts!" yelled another, as they scrambled to put distance between themselves and Duke. The leader, knife in hand, hesitated, his arrogance melting into unease. "This isn't worth it," he muttered, backing away. The 3 men turned and bolted, their retreat punctuated by curses and the slap of their footsteps against the pavement. Duke stood his ground, barking after them until their figures disappeared into the shadows. Slowly, his growl subsided and his tense posture relaxed. I crouched down, my hands trembling as I scratched behind his ears. "Good boy," I whispered, my voice thick with gratitude. "You've saved me." By the time we returned home, I'd already reported the incident to the police. The next morning, an officer stopped by to let me know that 2 of the 3 men had been caught. Thanks to Duke, they wouldn't be causing trouble again anytime soon. That night I realized Duke wasn't just my protector, he was my hero. The bond we shared was unbreakable, forged not only through trust but through moments like these, where he reminded me that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it growls. The man swung the rusty metal pipe with all his strength, aiming straight at Duke. But Duke, with the precision and agility of a trained professional, ducked out of the way just in time. The pipe whistled through the air, hitting nothing but the empty space where Duke had been a split second earlier. Before the man could react, Duke lunged again, this time aiming for the pipe itself. His powerful jaws clamped down on it, wrenching it out of the man's hands like it was a twig. The man stumbled back, tripping over his feet and landing hard on the pavement. His face twisted in fear as Duke loomed over him, still holding the pipe in his jaws as if to say, "Is this all you've got?" The guy on the ground froze, his bravado entirely drained, his hands raised in surrender. The third man, the youngest of the group, finally found his voice. "Man, this dog is crazy," he shouted, backing away slowly. His eyes darted between his friends and me, clearly torn between running and trying to salvage the situation. Duke turned his attention to the retreating man, his sharp bark echoing through the street like a command. The sound stopped the man in his tracks, his hands trembling as he held them up. I don't want any trouble," he stammered. "I'm done, I'm out." "Smart choice," I said, my voice calm but firm. I tightened my grip on Duke's leash, not that he needed any encouragement. His eyes remained locked on the group, his stance unyielding, his growl a low, steady reminder of what he was capable of. The tallest man, still on the ground from Duke's earlier tackle, tried to scoot backward, his hands scraping against the pavement. "Lady, call him off," he yelled, his voice cracking with desperation. "We're leaving, okay? Just call him off." I stepped forward, letting Duke take a step closer to the fallen man. "You should have thought about that before you decided to mess with us," I said. "Now, pick up your buddy and get out of here before Duke decides you haven't learned your lesson." The three men scrambled to their feet, their earlier bravado replaced with wide-eyed panic. The man who had swung the pipe limped as he backed away, his hand still raised in a gesture of surrender. The youngest one grabbed the metallic object that had fallen earlier and shoved it into his pocket, his hands trembling so much he almost dropped it again. Duke didn't move, his gaze following their every step as they retreated down the street. When they were finally out of sight, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. "Good boy," I said, crouching down and rubbing Duke's ears. His tail wagged slightly, but his posture remained alert, as if he knew the night wasn't over yet. A neighbor, Mrs. Green, stepped out of her front door, her phone clutched in her hand. "Maggie, are you okay?" she called out, her voice tinged with worry. "I'm fine, thanks to Duke," I replied, standing up and giving her a small wave. "Did you call the police?" She nodded, glancing down the street where the men had disappeared. "They're on their way. I saw the whole thing from my window. That dog of yours is a hero." I smiled, looking down at Duke, who was finally starting to relax. "He always has been." A few minutes later, the flashing lights of a patrol car illuminated the street. Officers stepped out, taking statements and noting every detail Mrs. Green and I could provide. Duke sat by my side, calm and composed, as if the chaos from earlier had never happened. One of the officers, a young man named Officer Delgado, crouched down to give Duke a pat on the head. "I've heard stories about dogs like him," Delgado said, his tone filled with admiration. "But I've never seen one in action like this. You've got yourself a real protector here, ma'am." "I know," I replied, scratching Duke behind the ears. "He's more than a protector. His family." By the time the officers finished their investigation and left, the adrenaline was starting to wear off. Duke and I walked back home under the glow of the streetlights, the neighborhood quiet once again. As I locked the door behind us, I couldn't help but feel a surge of gratitude for my four-legged hero. That night, as I settled into bed, Duke lay at the foot, his head resting on his paws. The events of the evening replayed in my mind, and I realized something important. No matter what life throws at us, we're stronger when we stand together. Duke proved that courage doesn't always come in human form. It can come on four legs, with a wagging tail and a heart full of loyalty. None of you geniuses thought it was a good idea to mess with a 65-year-old woman and her retired police dog. That's where you went wrong. The man's mouth opened as if to respond, but he quickly thought better of it, clamping it shut as Duke gave a low growl, reminding everyone who was still in control. The tension hung thick in the air, broken only by the faint wail of approaching sirens in the distance. Relief washed over me, knowing backup was on the way. The guy pinned under Duke squirmed again, his voice shaky. "I said I'm done. Get him off me already," he pleaded, his earlier bravado completely gone. "Stay still," I said sharply, my voice firm. "The more you move, the less patient he gets, and trust me, you don't want to test his patience." Duke held his ground, unmoving and resolute. His training was evident in the way he managed to control the entire situation without causing unnecessary harm. He wasn't just protecting me, he was demonstrating what years of discipline and loyalty could accomplish. When the police finally arrived, 2 patrol cars screeched to a halt at the curb, their lights casting a surreal glow on the chaotic scene. Officers rushed out, taking in the sight of Duke holding one man down, another standing with his hands still in the air, and the third groaning on the ground, nursing what was probably going to be a nasty bruise from my handbag. "What happened here?" one of the officers, a young man named Officer Daniels, asked, his wide eyes scanning the scene. "Hades 3 thought they'd try their luck," I said, gesturing toward the men. "But Duke here had other plans." Daniels crouched down, assessing the man under Duke. "You good to release him, Mum?" he asked, nodding toward my loyal companion. "Duke, heel," I commanded, my voice calm but firm. Duke immediately stepped back, retreating to my side, but he kept his eyes locked on the man, as if daring him to try anything. The officers quickly moved in, cuffing the men while reading them their rights. One of them grumbled, "You don't understand, her dog's crazy." Daniels straightened, his expression unimpressed. "What I understand," he said dryly, "is that you attacked someone and her dog stopped you. Now shut up and get in the car." As the men were led away, Daniels turned to me with an almost incredulous smile. "Ma'am, I think your dog just did half our job for us. He's incredible." I smiled, patting Duke on the head. "He's more than incredible, officer. He's a hero." Another officer, a woman named Sergeant Harper, approached with a clipboard. "We'll need a full statement, Ms. Margaret," she said kindly. "But I have to say, I'm impressed. Most people wouldn't have handled this situation nearly as well." "Most people don't have Duke," I replied, glancing down at my loyal companion, who was now sitting calmly by my side, as if the chaos from earlier had never happened. After giving my statement and ensuring the men were securely in custody, the officers thanked me and promised to follow up. As the patrol cars pulled away, the street fell quiet again. The adrenaline was finally starting to wear off, leaving me feeling a little shaky, but overwhelmingly grateful. As we walked home, I looked down at Duke. "You saved me again, didn't you?" I said softly, scratching behind his ears. His tail wagged slightly, and he let out a soft huff, almost as if to say, "Always." When we got back inside, I locked the door behind us and sank into my favorite armchair. Duke lay at my feet, his eyes watching me intently, ever the protector. I thought about the night's events, the fear, the chaos, and the way Duke had stepped in without hesitation. In that moment, I realized just how lucky I was to have him. Duke wasn't just a dog. He was a reminder that strength and courage can come in all forms, and sometimes they come with fur and a wagging tail. Retired canine take down late-night attackers, and legendary police dog saves the day. Duke, the unsung hero, had become the talk of the town overnight. My phone buzzed with calls and messages from neighbors, friends, and even people I hadn't spoken to in years. "You're famous," one neighbor, Ellen, exclaimed over the phone. "They're calling you and Duke local legends." I chuckled, glancing down at Duke, who was lounging by my feet like the calm, composed hero he was. "I think Duke's enjoying the attention more than I am," I replied, scratching behind his ears. He wagged his tail slightly, as if to confirm it. By mid-morning, a reporter from the local news station, Channel 8 Action News, knocked on my door. A young, eager journalist named Sarah introduced herself and asked if she could interview me and, of course, Duke. "People are fascinated by the story," she said, her notepad already out. "They want to know more about the brave woman and her remarkable dog." I hesitated for a moment. I wasn't one for the limelight. But then I looked at Duke, who had risen to his feet and was watching Sarah with calm curiosity. "All right," I said. But it's Duke who deserves the spotlight, not me. The interview was short but heartfelt. Sarah asked about Duke's history, his years as a police nine, and how he came to live with me. I shared how he'd been retired due to an injury, and how adopting him had been one of the best decisions I'd ever made. He's more than just a pet, I told her. He's family. And last night he reminded me why he's also a hero. When she asked how I'd stayed so calm during the confrontation, I shrugged. You don't panic when you have Duke by your side. He's been through more than most people can imagine, and he knows exactly what to do. By the afternoon, the story had spread even further. Clips of the incident, caught by the security camera and shared by the police department, went viral. People were in awe of Duke's precision and bravery. Comments poured in on social media. This dog is a real-life superhero. Duke deserves a medal. Can we get more stories like this? The world needs them. As I scrolled through the flood of comments, I couldn't help but smile. The chaos of the night before had transformed into something positive, a reminder of the bond between humans and their canine companions, and the bravery of a dog who refused to let danger win. Later that evening, the police department reached out. They wanted to honor Duke for his actions. The next day, they held a small ceremony at the station. Officers who had worked with Duke years ago came to pay their respects, sharing stories of his past heroics. Even the chief of police gave a speech, calling Duke an example of courage and loyalty. Duke received a shiny new medal, which he seemed more interested in sniffing than wearing, but the pride in his posture as he stood before the small crowd was unmistakable. For a dog who had dedicated so much of his life to protecting others, this moment of recognition felt well-deserved. After the ceremony, I brought Duke home, his medal tucked safely in my bag. As we settled back into our quiet routine, I reflected on everything that had happened. The fear and adrenaline of that night had given way to an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Gratitude for Duke, for the officers who responded, and for the community rallying around us. Not bad for an old lady and her dog. Huh, I said, glancing down at Duke. He wagged his tail and rested his head on my knee, his quiet way of saying, "We did good." From that day forward, people in the neighborhood would stop to greet us on our walks, some even asking for pictures with the hero dog. Duke didn't seem to mind the attention, but he never let it distract him from his primary mission, keeping me safe. As for me, I carried that night's lessons with me. Lessons about strength, loyalty, and the unbreakable bond between a person and their dog. Duke had reminded me that even in the most daunting moments, courage can shine through, and heroes come in all shapes and sizes. Even with 4 legs and a wagging tail, Duke had done. But because of what it reminded me about strength, community, and resilience, that night wasn't just about stopping a few bad guys. It was about proving that, even in the face of danger, courage and loyalty prevail. As the weeks passed, the buzz around the incident began to die down, but the impact lingered. More neighbors started chatting with me during our walks, and some even asked about self-defense tips or how to find a dog like Duke. It felt like the story had sparked a sense of awareness in our community, a reminder that safety and vigilance were everyone's responsibility. One afternoon, Officer Greg Larson, the one who'd worked with Duke during his time on the force, stopped by for a visit. "Just wanted to check in and see how you two are holding up," he said, holding a bag of treats for Duke. "We're doing just fine," I replied with a smile, watching as Duke greeted him with a wagging tail. "Though I think someone's getting a little too used to all the attention." Greg laughed, crouching to pet Duke. "He's earned it. You know, back in the day, we used to joke that Duke had a sixth sense for trouble. Looks like that hasn't changed." We sat on the porch, reminiscing about Duke's time in the 9 unit. Greg shared stories of Duke's incredible instincts and bravery, from sniffing out contraband to de-escalating tense situations with just his presence. "You've got a 1-in-a-million dog there," he said, his tone serious now. "And after what happened, I think the whole neighborhood knows." That night, as Duke and I walked past his plaque, I felt a wave of gratitude. Not just for him, but for the way that one night had brought people together. It reminded me of something I'd always believed. Heroes don't always wear capes, and sometimes they come with 4 legs, a wagging tail, and an unwavering sense of joy. Life eventually settled back into its familiar rhythm, but Duke's story continued to ripple through the community. Schools invited us to talk about safety and the bond between humans and their pets. Kids loved hearing about Duke's adventures, their eyes lighting up as they petted him and asked questions about his time as a police dog. One day, a local animal shelter reached out, asking if I'd consider helping with their campaign to encourage adoption of retired nines. They wanted to use Duke's story as an example of how these dogs, even after their service, still had so much love and protection to give. I couldn't say no. Duke was proof of that. The campaign was a success. Dozens of retired working dogs found new homes, their second chapters just beginning. Seeing their stories unfold brought me a sense of fulfillment, knowing that Duke's legacy was inspiring others to give these incredible animals a chance to keep making a difference. As for Duke, he remained the steady, loyal companion he'd always been. Every time we passed his plaque, I'd give him an extra pat on the head, a quiet acknowledgement of everything he'd done for me and our community. "Not bad for an old dog, huh?" I'd say, and Duke, in his quiet, dignified way, would wag his tail, as if to say, "You ain't seen nothing yet." As the days turned into weeks, Duke and I continued our walks, though now they were met with waves, smiles, and occasional nods of appreciation from neighbors. The plaque stood as a quiet reminder of the bravery that had unfolded on that corner, a symbol of resilience and unity in our little community. One evening, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, a young boy named Ethan approached us with his mother. Ethan, no older than 10, looked up at me with wide, curious eyes, holding a notebook tightly to his chest. "Miss Margaret," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "I wrote about Duke for my school project. My teacher said it was the best story in class." His mother smiled warmly, placing a gentle hand on Ethan's shoulder. "He's been inspired by what happened that night. He even wants to be a police officer when he grows up." Duke, ever the charmer, leaned down to sniff the boy's notebook, earning a giggle. I crouched down beside them, resting a hand on Duke's back. "That's a wonderful ambition, Ethan. Just remember, being an officer isn't just about strength. It's about protecting those who can't protect themselves, and standing up for what's right, no matter how hard it may seem." Ethan nodded solemnly, his admiration for Duke shining brightly. As he and his mother walked away, I felt a swell of pride. Duke's story had sparked something meaningful in our town, a ripple of hope, courage, and kindness that reminded us all of the power of doing good. The story of Lawson Margaret and her loyal dog Duke teaches us a powerful lesson about courage, trust, and standing up for what's right, principles that are equally applicable to everyday life. In my own life, I can draw inspiration from Lawson's calm determination and Duke's unwavering loyalty. It reminds me that even in difficult situations, staying composed and believing in the support systems around me, whether they are people, pets, or inner strength, can make a world of difference. The story also highlights the importance of preparation and training. Just as Duke's years of training turned him into a protector, I can take steps to equip myself with knowledge and skills to handle life's challenges, whether it's learning conflict resolution, building strong relationships, or staying physically and mentally fit. Preparation can turn adversity into an opportunity to grow. Moreover, Lawson's community rallied around her after the incident, showing how acts of courage and kindness can inspire others. In my life, I can strive to create a ripple effect by standing firm in my values and helping others whenever possible. It's a reminder that every small act of bravery and integrity contributes to a better, more compassionate world.